Imagine a future where your child wasn't conceived, the old-fashioned way, but was maybe born from an AI. Is that just some sci-fi fever dream? Or maybe closer than we think. Welcome to Cool, Weird, and Possible.
Hey there. And yeah, we've got a really fascinating stack of sources to dig into with you today. We're talking reports, research papers, articles, all touching on synthetic biology, cyborgs, AI, and the pretty surprising ways technology is already kind of messing with our basic ideas about family.
Yeah, when I saw the title for this deep dive, Can You Have a Baby with an AI? Honestly, my first thought was, okay, how weird are we actually talking here? So looking at these materials you sent over, my mission really is to unpack what they're saying about this genuinely wild intersection of tech, life, and, well, kinship. We'll try to figure out what's cool, what's definitely unsettlingly weird, and maybe what's actually possible when it comes to creating life and families in this brave new world of AI and advanced biotech. Let's get into it.
All right, let's dive in. A good place to start, where some of the sources do, is synthetic biology. And look, this isn't just, tinkering with organisms that already exist. As one report puts it, this field is really about applying serious engineering principles to biology itself. The goal, to modify existing life or even create entirely new biological systems. It's a big leap.
Whoa, so instead of just finding life, we're building it. Kind of like with Legos, but, organic ones.
In a very simplified way, yeah. Or maybe more accurately, heavily re-engineering biological systems we already have, but for totally new jobs. The reports show this is already happening commercially. You see it in agriculture, food, medicine,
Yeah.
even electronics. But documents like that NATO report we looked at, they're very upfront about the challenges.
Challenges like.
Well, big technological hurdles. For one, scaling up production, finding the funding, and crucially, these huge ethical and regulatory questions that we're, frankly, far from figuring out.
Okay, ethical questions. Now you've got my attention. Are we talking designer babies again? Or did any of the sources maybe hint at something, I don't know, a bit more conspiratorial, like weaponizing life?
That NATO document specifically calls out the dual-use nature of this tech.
Yeah.
Yes, it has incredible potential for good, absolutely. But the sources are pretty clear. It could also be deliberately misused for harm. The core idea they keep stressing is, how do we embrace the good stuff while actively avoiding the bad? It's not just talk. The ethics need to be baked in from the start, according to these papers.
Right, because if you get the power to engineer the literal building blocks of life,
Right.
wow, the potential for things going wrong or someone making them go wrong just feels huge. Okay, so that's engineering life. What about engineering us? This is where the cyborg stuff comes in.
Exactly. And the idea of blending human and machine, it's been around in fiction for like over a century. Think early sci-fi folks like Edgar Allan Poe hinting at enhancements, or C.L. Moore's story from 1944 about a dancer's brain in a robot body.
Huh. So the idea itself, this human-machine mashup, it's actually pretty old.
The idea, absolutely, in our imaginations anyway. The actual word cyborg, though, that was coined much later, 1960, by two scientists, Manfred Clynes and Nathan Klein. And their definition, we found it in one of the historical pieces. It's super technical. An exogenously extended organizational complex functioning as an integrated homeostatic system unconsciously. Kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But what's really surprising is why they came up with it. They weren't thinking, Terminators. They were thinking about enhancing humans to survive deep space.
Wait, hang on. Enhanced humans for space? Like giving us built-in radiation shields or something like that?
That's exactly the kind of thing they were theorizing. Systems using, say, inverse fuel cells to handle CO2 waste, or tiny osmotic pumps delivering drugs automatically to fight radiation sickness. They based some of this on actual experiments with monkeys. It was the sheer difficulty, the danger of putting humans in space, that got them thinking about really intimate human-machine integration.
Wow, okay. That's a surprisingly practical origin for something that sounds so far out, almost mundane in a weird way. So where are we now with it? Are we all walking around with, like, tech bolted onto us?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the most obvious practical uses are definitely in medicine, biotechnology, especially for restoring functions people have lost. Prosthetics, for example, have gotten incredibly sophisticated. And beyond that, the research documents talk a lot about neural enhancement and restoration.
Neural enhancement?
Yeah.
Like brain stuff?
Yeah. There's mention of direct brain implants used way back in 1978, actually, to treat acquired blindness. They managed to restore some sight shades of gray to one person. And more recently, you see experimental devices trying to restore voice using nerve signals to control a voice simulator. Pretty amazing stuff.
Okay, so tech fixing what's broken, that makes total sense. But what about adding new abilities, pushing what a human body can actually do?
Right, and that's where things get, well, really interesting and maybe a bit weird, like you said, based on what the sources describe. This is where the lines really start to smudge. We saw that example in the material about the artist, Wafa Bilal. He surgically implanted a digital camera into the back of his head for an art project.
He did what? A camera in his head?
Yep. Literally adding a new sensory input through technology. And then there's research, serious research, into integrating tech directly with living things to create biohybrid robots.
Biohybrid robots. Okay, that sounds like something straight out of a creepy sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the reports describe them using actual living components like muscle tissue to make things move, or incorporating living sensors like insect antenna for better detection. One thing I mentioned that really stood out was using living neurons to control mobile robots.
Living neurons controlling a robot. Okay, now that feels like it goes way beyond just fixing a limb. That's, I don't know, bordering on consciousness. What does that even mean ethically?
That is precisely the critical question one of the sources brings up.
Mm-hmm.
It flags major ethical concerns, specifically about these biohybrid things, like interactivity, how these blended things interact with us, with the world. Integrability, could humans start integrating these biorobotic bits into themselves, maybe as organs? And crucially, their moral status. When does something that's this complex mix of living and synthetic stuff start to matter morally?
Yeah, exactly. When does a really, really complex tool start to become something else entirely? I mean, we're already seeing simple tech implants in people for practical reasons, right? Like those chips for getting into buildings.
That's right. One article mentioned microchip implants being used, I think it was in Sweden, for employees building access, making payments, that sort of thing. And the concept of a body net is also being explored. Imagine a whole network of tiny sensors and transmitters implanted throughout your body.
Wow.
But that immediately raises huge security worries, right? Hackers could potentially get access, maybe even control these devices inside someone's body.
Cybersecurity for your internal organs. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's terrifying.
It definitely adds a whole new layer to security threats. And the sources also touch on the psychological side. The potential anxiety people might feel having heavily augmented bodies, maybe feeling like another, or having this kind of fragmented cyborged identity.
Okay, so synthetic biology lets us engineer life. Cyborg tech lets us engineer our bodies, blurring flesh and machine. Now, bring AI into this. Specifically, how does AI connect back to that first kind of wild question about having a baby with AI?
Right. Well, based purely on the source material we looked at for this deep dive, it's very clear. AI is not described as being able to biologically conceive or, birth a child.
Hmm?
AI just doesn't have biological reproductive systems. That's not what it is.
Okay, phew. So no actual AI babies cooking in servers somewhere, but
Wow.
what about AI's ability to create? We know it can generate images, text. Can it create like representations of people?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where generative AI is incredibly powerful, as one source really detailed. It highlighted how fast these models, especially the text-to-image ones, have gotten really, really good. They can create stunningly photorealistic images just from a simple text description. And honestly, in many cases, you just can't tell these AI images apart from real photos anymore.
That report, the one about AI-generated CSAM,
Hmm.
that was incredibly disturbing to read. It showed a really dark, very real use of this ability to create fake people.
It's a truly stark example, and yes, profoundly disturbing. The report went into detail about how perpetrators are actively using this tech to create child sexual abuse material. It also raised some really concerning points about how some AI models were actually trained on data sets that maybe accidentally contained this kind of awful material, which then, unfortunately, taught the models how to generate it. This isn't just theoretical risk anymore. Law enforcement is actually seeing people openly discussing how to best misuse this technology.
So AI isn't making biological life, but it can make incredibly convincing photorealistic simulations, representations of people, including kids. And this capability has very real, very damaging consequences out here in the physical world. It's mimicking reality so well, it can be deeply harmful.
Precisely. And this ability to create these sophisticated digital things that perfectly mimic reality, it has broader implications too, as one source pointed out. Implications for how we even understand what's real or authentic anymore. It forces us to ask what counts as a person or even a family if it exists only digitally. Or when these digital representations start interacting with the real world, defining personhood or authenticity.
Mhm.
When AI can make perfect fakes, It's becoming a really tough challenge.
Which feels like a pretty good transition to the last area the sources touched on. How technology is already changing, how families are formed, how parenting happens, even without needing AI or cyborg babies.
Yes, exactly. Assisted reproductive technologies, ARTs, are the big example here. Practices like egg freezing, the technical term is oocyte vitrification, are discussed in one report. They basically allow people, women especially, to stretch out their fertility window. The source talks about this in the context of the biopolitics of fertility management.
Biopolitics.
Yeah, suggesting technology is being used to kind of push back against biological aging, giving people more control over when they try for biological kids, often influenced by things like career paths or, economic stability.
So tech giving people more choice, maybe more agency, or perhaps even putting more pressure on them about the timing of having biological children.
Right. It cuts both ways, potentially.
Yeah.
And the sources also mention posthumous reproduction.
Posthumous reproduction.
Yeah, using cryopreserved genetic material, sperm or eggs, to conceive a child after one of the biological parents has died.
Wow. Okay, that one definitely slides into the weird category for me. It feels uncanny, like trying to cheat death itself to have a baby.
It certainly pushes against our usual boundaries of life, death, and family lines, and it raises really complex legal and ethical questions, especially around stuff like inheritance. How does this tech-mediated reproduction fit into our traditional ideas about family structure? What one source called the intergenerational care pact.
Yeah. Who is responsible, legally or morally, for a child conceived like that? What do the sources say about simulating the experience of parenting? I know those robot babies exist.
They do. The sources talk about parenting simulation tech, like those real care babies. Apparently, they're used sometimes, maybe with vulnerable groups or teenagers, supposedly to see how someone might cope with parenting, or maybe to encourage delaying pregnancy by showing just how demanding babies are.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. They
Yeah.
seem pretty effective at simulating sleep deprivation, at least.
Well, researchers look into them. Some people see value, maybe in shifting attitudes about teen pregnancy. But the studies looking at how effective they are with, say, expectant parents who have safeguarding concerns. The sources noted that evidence is still pretty limited. They're simulated the work of parenting, right? A kind of tech reality check.
Yeah.
They're not actually enabling conception or creating life itself.
Got it. And there were also mentions of co-parenting apps, weren't there? Like tech tools to help separated families.
Yes, exactly. The sources mentioned apps like Talking Parents or HomeFlow. These are really practical tools. They're designed to support existing family structures, often complex ones, especially after divorce when parents need to coordinate. They help with communication, schedules, tracking expenses, even logging stuff for legal reasons. So definitely tech-changing family dynamics, but more in a support role, not a creation one.
Okay, all right. So let's try and pull all this material together now. We've looked at synthetic biology, basically engineering life itself. We've looked at cyborg technology, merging human and machine, AI, creating these incredibly realistic digital copies or representations, and then existing tech that's already reshaping how we reproduce and how we manage family life. The big provocative question we started with was about having a baby with an AI.
And based on everything we've reviewed today from these sources, there's just nothing there suggesting AI can biologically conceive or give birth. That specific idea, having a biological baby with an AI, according to this material, that's still firmly in the realm of science fiction.
Right, no AI baby mama. But the technologies we did discuss, engineering life from the ground up, engineering our own bodies, creating perfect digital duplicates, messing with the timing of reproduction, they are absolutely pushing at the fundamental boundaries. Boundaries of what biological life even is, what a person could be, how creation happens, and yeah, what a family might look like down the road.
That is definitely the big picture these sources paint. Synthetic biology is fundamentally questioning biological life, maybe even allowing for totally new forms we haven't seen. Cyborg tech is challenging what it means to be human by literally weaving machines into our bodies. AI is creating these digital beings and interactions that can perfectly pretend to be real, making us question authenticity and personhood. And our eyes are giving us unprecedented control over how and when biology happens, while other tools are simulating the experience of raising kids.
It really feels like all these things, when you put them together, are just chipping away at the old definitions we rely on. You know, the line between what's natural and what's artificial, human versus machine, reality versus simulation, it's getting really, really blurry. Just like
Yeah.
the sources hinted with ideas like human material synthesis and increased hybridity.
Exactly. That hybridity, the blending of the biological, the digital, the artificial, that seems to be a key theme running through the future hinted at in these documents.
And that dual use thing we mentioned earlier, That's like a constant shadow hanging over all of this, isn't it? The incredible potential for good right alongside the scary potential for misuse and just stuff we can't even foresee yet.
It is, and it's a really critical point that gets emphasized across the different sources we looked at,
Hmm.
from potential bioweapons coming out of synthetic biology to the really awful misuse of generative AI we discussed. The risks are huge. They absolutely require careful ethical thinking and, likely, regulation. One source even flat out said policymakers are kind of behind the curve in dealing with some of this, especially the AI side.
So, bottom line from these sources, no biological AI babies on the immediate horizon. Phew. But the way these technologies are evolving so fast, it feels like it's setting the stage for some truly profound, maybe unsettling changes in what life, people, and families even mean in the future. It really makes you wonder.
Yeah, it does. And here's a thought to leave you with, drawing from all this. Given these rapid advances, right? Synthetic biology letting us engineer life, humans and machines merging into cyborgs, AI getting better and better at creating simulations that feel totally real.
Yeah.
How are our fundamental definitions of life itself, of personhood, of what it means to be a parent, what makes a family, how are those definitions going to have to change in the coming decades? And maybe more importantly, what responsibilities do we have right now to really understand this and try to shape that future ethically?
Definitely something to chew on long after this deep dive is over. Thanks so much for joining us for this look into the cool, the weird, and the very, very possible future.